Okay, just before I introduce the next guests, it would be remiss of me not to very, very briefly thank the ICRC and Tel Aviv University for giving their time at Cyber Week and AI Week to this really, really important discussion. And also, I want to thank the panel, Avi, Carol, Stav, Tal-Or, and Maya, for getting some phone calls and some LinkedIn messages and some frantic emails from crazy women that have nothing to do with anti-Semitism that they never heard of before, begging them to come and speak at this event. So I really appreciate your time. And now, I'd like to invite to the stage Shiran, Mlamdovsky, Somech, I'm sorry for the pronunciation, the founder of Generative AI for Good, and Michal, Kotler, who is the Special Envoy for Antisemitism. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michal Cotler-Wunsh, as was introduced as Israel's Special Envoy for Combating Anti-Semitism. I'll say that in Israel, generally, people have no idea who I am or that this role exists. But I will share with you that I'm one of about 30 Special Envoys for Combating Anti-Semitism. Israel was a little bit late to join this coalition of Special Envoys, as life would have it. The United States, Canada, many countries in Europe, the European Parliament, South American countries have Special Envoys for Combating Anti-Semitism, which is really bad news, because in the last decade, anti-Semitism has been on the consistent rise. I was appointed about 3 weeks before 10/7, is Israel's second Special Envoy for Combating Anti-Semitism, and I will share, and including, as Carol alluded to it, the tsunami of anti-Semitism. What I will say briefly is that the very same anti-Semitism that fueled the atrocities, the war crimes, the crimes against humanity that we saw on 10/7 is the anti-Semitism that fuels the responses to the war crimes, the crimes against humanity, the atrocities of 10/7. Responses of silence, me too, unless you're a Jew, responses of denial, which really preoccupy me in a very huge way, because whereas it took decades for systematic Holocaust denial, 10/7 denial happened on 10/7, even while those barbaric savages live streamed with exhilaration what it was that they were doing, and we just heard the technological explanation for that. The justification, I'll say I'm old enough that I studied law when Judith Butler was who we studied for radical feminism. Judith Butler explaining rape as armed resistance, and of course the attack of Jews that Avi just gave us the last week of understanding the attack of Jews around the world, from Berlin to New York to LA to Montreal, around the world on university campuses, on the streets, in their schools, in their synagogues, and of course online. I'll share with you that this preoccupies me very deeply as not only coming from the international legal world, but the understanding that 10/7 exposed the intersection between three, I'm going to say, fronts of this unconventional war for public opinion that are very much my areas of expertise. This is not my area of expertise. It's very new for me. The first war front is the international institutions. We'll delve a little bit more into that. The second war front, which I'm very familiar with, is the university spaces. And the third is the social media spaces, or the digital spaces in AI, that I only became familiar with, I'll be honest, and I understand it very little, when I myself was a legislator, founding in Israel's Knesset an interparliamentary task force to combat online anti-Semitism during COVID. That, as they say in Hebrew, ma kesher, during COVID, there was this huge surge of anti-Semitism, COVID-48, and so on. And so we began an engagement in Israel's Knesset with Twitter and Facebook and TikTok and Google, and that led to the work of an interparliamentary task force to combat online anti-Semitism that has since held hearings in Congress, in the European Parliament. And I'm very, very grateful to the organizers of this conference for giving me the opportunity to engage in what I'm least comfortable in, which is the technological translation of what I know. I refer to these things as like lacunae because I'm a lawyer, but an algorithm for me is a lacune that just keeps changing and actually morphing. And the understanding that what we've seen in the online spaces in AI is something that we have to understand, whether as legislators, whether as combaters of anti-Semitism, or as actually concerned citizens that understand that the way in which we consume information for all of humanity has changed dramatically, but we haven't changed the way that we are consuming that information. So thank you for having me. Thank you to the organizers.
Hello, everyone. Good night, good evening, and thank you, Luis, for pronouncing my name pretty well, even you don't have your glasses on it. I'm Shiran Mlamdovsky Somech, the founder of Generative AI for Good, and we are leveraging generative AI for addressing severe social issues in different domains, the SDG if you want. And in the last panel, Carol and the team, you mentioned the use of AI, Gen AI and AI, if it's good, if it's bad. So today I want to focus on the advantage of the Gen AI, especially because I experienced it firsthand. Before the Generative AI for Good, I lived a parallel life. I had my day job. I used to work with tech and startup companies and multinational. And in my night job, I used to volunteer in different organizations until 3 years ago, I came with a very avant-garde, or you can say bizarre, but I like to rephrase it as a very special idea. I thought that we can give a voice to the women that are not with us anymore, that has been murdered by the intimate partner. And we as a society can learn a lot from what's happened to them. But at that point, I didn't know if this could be a good initiative or just crazy one. But luckily, this idea became a reality and very successful reality. And I saw that after we used Gen AI in a very responsible and very sensitive way, we dramatically increased awareness to domestic violence. And from that day, I decided that this is what I want to do for a living, leverage the Gen AI in very responsible and professional and sensitive way to address social issues. And today, we are going to talk about it in the related to anti-Semitism. Thank you. So, Michal, very excited to be next to you and learn from your experience. So the first question, what are the main challenges in combating online anti-Semitism today?
So I'll share with you that we engage with social media platforms, as I referred to before, and actually Talor and I were just at a meeting. After several hearings, we held a meeting in the State Department with my counterpart in the United States, Deborah Lipstadt, who convened in the State Department the social media platforms with an understanding that actually online anti-Semitism obviously does not remain online, but also that online anti-Semitism is a national security threat to whatever countries allow it, enable it to run rampant. And not only doesn't what happen online remain online, but obviously this is a global challenge, and the United States has a really big role to play with all of the social media platforms. So Talor was there as a tech expert, and we've engaged tech experts throughout because you can imagine the gap between the legislators that are trying to hold social media companies to account and the social media companies. And to be very honest, what I've discovered in the last, so it's since 2020, 4 years of this conversation with the social media platforms, is there is a business model. The business model works really well. And unless we manage to hold the social media companies to account, there's no reason to change the business model. It simply sells. And we have to understand, I said the word algorithm before. I don't understand what the algorithm is, but neither do the black box of the 40,000 content moderators that many of the social media platforms have, and they need Talor to come and tell them what it is that they're not doing in enforcing their own policies. And so that is actually one of the biggest challenges, is the gap between what is in this black box and demanding or making very clear that society, that includes legislators, that includes the public, that includes other international platforms. Society expects transparency. It's one key word that I've used across spaces and places, by the way, whether it's the international institutions, whether it's the university spaces, or whether it's the social media companies. What we need to ensure is transparency. Transparency, in their case, of algorithm, transparency of policy, and transparency of the implementation of their policies. And that is the challenge that we are facing right now, and I think we are facing it as humanity. I do not believe that what we saw before 10/7 should have surprised us. But 10/7 and the responses to 10/7 have made very clear not just the 10/7, and I refer to it as 10/7 intentionally, because like 9/11, it was the attack of barbarism on civilization. We have to be very clear on that. And that means that that translates into online spaces and the offline spaces. But in fact, what it does is make this a critical existential learning possibility or case study that understands precisely how it is that the online spaces functioned in order to be able to increase not just the scourge of anti-Semitism, but the pernicious nature and the speed with which people my age remember the saying that that the lie makes its way around the world before the truth straps its boots on. Well, that was way before social media and way before AI. Those are the biggest challenges that we've faced in the last sort of few years, and I think the 10/7 just ripped off all those masks and made very accessible the intersection between the fronts that we face and the social media or the digital spaces as really fueling the offline spaces, whether they be the university spaces, encampments, and so on, or whether they be what happens on the streets. But I want to be a little bit positive. So because I don't understand what generative AI is, other than possibly the negative forms that I've seen on and since 10/7. Can you, Shiran, share, as far as you're concerned, the biggest advantages that you've encountered in using generative AI for combating anti-Semitism specifically?
Yeah, so there is a lot of negativity, for sure. But I think it's really important to highlight the advantage of the Gen AI and how we can leverage it. So I will consider three aspects. The first one is accessibility. The second one is detection and trends. And the third one is fostering empathy and compassion. So about accessibility, first of all, it's no need technical background to use this technology. So basically, each of us can pretty easily create content to use on Gen AI, a pretty compelling content. And also we can do it with a low resource and with a minimal time as well. We can do it in different languages for the various social media platform, and it's very easy, very fast. And the second thing, and also can you give you an example? I think Carol, you mentioned it also in the panel. I think it's not a post. It was against us actually. It's All Eyes on Rafah, for example. How we can learn from this use of Gen AI. Because who's created it? It was created by a young man from Malaysia. And it was just a simple post, not a graphical images inside it. And it was also aligned with the social media guidelines. So it's pretty easily went very viral on social media with 47 million shares all around the world, also with very famous influencers also share it, because it was very easy content to share and very compelling one. And I think we can very easily learn from that use case. So this is one example. And when we're talking about detection and trend, so also you discussed it was very interesting to learn about your activity in the detecting in online anti-Semitism, I think in the first stage, but also we should think about what we are detect actually, because there are, of course, the implicit phrases of anti-Semitism, there is the Nazi, there is a Zionist, and so on, but also what about all the implicit form? Now they have a new form of anti-Semitism, like the decoding one, or they're using a different symbol as well. It's very important to treat them as well. I'm familiar with a very interesting initiative named Decoding Antisemitism, for Dr. Matthias Baker. Yeah, he also should be here. Yes, yes. And he showed me how, for example, like anti-Semitic phrases that we are familiar with, like Hitler was right. Now they're using a different one, like the Austrian artist was right, for example. So we definitely should consider this when we detect the anti-Semitism online. So this is the second thing. And the third one is fostering empathy, not fostering anti-Semitism, fostering empathy and compassion. And this I can share from my experience. This we saw when we use this technology in a professional way, what we can achieve. So for example, after October 7th, many people reach out to me because of my experience in that field and ask when I'm going to do a project about the hostages. And my first response was, we cannot do it. Like, I cannot imagine myself going to the families and ask them to animate the loved ones because they are right now, just a few days, they kidnapped into Gaza. It was very emotional, very sensitive. And the second thing was deepfake, right? We were talking about deepfake, about Holocaust denial and October 7th denial and all of it. And I didn't want this project will be like a backlash on us from the other side. And the last thing was about the result, because we really need to have a professional result to gain this empathy, because it's very easy to get a cringy result, like unreal, and to be in the uncanny valley. And in that case, we can never gain the empathy that we want and the compassion. We will gain exactly the opposite. And with all that in mind, we decided to move forward and do this project. We get the consent from the family. And then we decided about the deepfake. They will include it inside the creative itself. And we explain why we have no other choice than to use AI. So we were transparent, but we did more than that. We explained why we use the AI, because those people are now silenced. And this is our mission, to be their voice. And this is also how we call the campaign. And the last one, we didn't use just on-the-shelf platform. We use AI, of course, but also we took a real facial expression of actresses and a real voices as well, and not synthetic one. And I have to say that this project was successful. We did 2 videos of 2 children. Luckily, they're both back home. Unfortunately, their father's still in captivity, so it's still not happy end. And we did in 2 languages, English and German, because the family asked. And as the grandfathers told us when he saw the first time the campaign, he told us it's like a heart to the heart. I wish we can hug them. I wish we can kiss them. I wish we can ask what is the situation, but we cannot. So we really need to use AI to be their voice.
Thank you.
So Michal, what role does social media play in the spread of anti-Semitism, and what can be done to reverse this trend?
So the first thing, and we're not going to get to all of our questions because our time's going to run out, but so maybe the most important thing that I want to say, and it's to do with this question, but it's true generally. We've said the word anti-Semitism over and over again, and Carol referred before very briefly to the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism. When you ask me what it is that we can do, and I would say what it is that we have to do in a post-10/7 reality, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, and I want to be clear, the result of a very long democratic process that actually enables to identify the mutation of what is, as Avi said, the oldest hatred in the world. It has existed for as long as Jews have existed. So Jew hatred, and this is the advantage, whereas we are talking about social media and AI and new medium in which we can see the spread of this Jew hatred, in fact, Jew hatred has always existed. And therefore, the mutation of anti-Semitism is very important to understand. If I had to say briefly, this modern mutated mainstream strain of anti-Semitism, as was made abundantly clear to those to whom it wasn't clear before 10/7, is anti-Zionism, or the denial of Israel's very right to exist. If we don't understand that, then we can't combat this virulent strain of anti-Semitism. Now, the thing is that when you understand that the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition not only took into account what began decades ago with the 1975 Zionism as Racism Resolution, Soviet propaganda that passed in the UN, is actually in 2024, in the name of progress, mainstream, normalized across campuses, across streets. When I come speak about anti-Semitism at every law school, the demonstrations against me are anti-Zionism. Zionists not welcome, Zionists off our street. So the understanding that Zionist codes Jew online and offline, or it began offline and is now online, makes it very clear why that 2001 the next step, the next blood libel, the 2001 Durban Conference Against Racism would have happened. The next blood libel turned Israel into an apartheid state. And I want to make very sure that you all know that around North America and many countries and many places in Europe, for 23 years there has been an Israel Apartheid Week on every single campus. And 2023, post 10/7, we are living through the third and most Orwellian inversion of fact and of law that has turned into Israel into none other than a genocidal state that is perpetrating a Holocaust. We have to understand that all of those make it critical that we use the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition that has 11 examples that enable to actually track every strain of anti-Semitism. Post-COVID, we're all viral experts, and we understand that if there is one strain of anti-Semitism or any virus, say COVID-19, when Omicron comes around, it doesn't matter that we were inoculated for the COVID-19 strain. Omicron is still going to run rampant. And if we don't identify all strains of what is an ever-mutating virus, and I think the online spaces, especially because you mentioned Matthias, actually has the capacity to change things dramatically. Because if we can actually predict the next mutation or the next understanding of how it is that the lacunae will be able to get through the cracks, in my legal terminology, or that the algorithm will actually not detect what the IRA working definition does on paper, then we can actually make accessible what it is that we are anticipating. And maybe I'll just, because we might not have time, say the key at this moment in time is to stop reacting. I used to call it, when we started our online anti-Semitism task force, we're playing whack-a-mole. Right? So we're chasing one piece of content, 40,000 content moderators in each one of those platforms, and they remove it after millions of people have actually seen what it is that Tal-Or makes accessible to them, to say to them, you're not enforcing your own policies. We have to be very proactive. And actually, the other thing that IRA is so instrumental for is to create proactive strategies across sectors. This is the convening of this in an interdisciplinary space, I think, is very significant, because I have spoken from a legal perspective, and we can talk from a legislative perspective, and we're talking about technology, except that that is going to be the key, to create a proactive, holistic strategy that takes into account all of these battlefronts, if you will, in which anti-Semitism and other forms of hate and misinformation and disinformation are utilizing the social media spaces for. So I'm going to ask you one more question, because I would like you to share the example in which generative AI did successfully oppose anti-Semitism, and I think that we have a video that we're going to show, and I don't want to run out of time before we do.
Exactly, and it's also very related what you say about to be proactive. I think we have no the privilege to be reactive at that point, especially with the Gen AI, especially the one of you who saw the report of UNESCO and the World Zionist Organization. I think it's very, very important for us to understand that in the Gen AI area, when almost 80% of the young generation are looking and searching and having their information from the Gen AI, not from Google anymore, it's very important for us to be active, because if not, all those kind of evil actors will seed some misinformation about the Holocaust, about October 7, about everything, and then the Gen AI will invent a new reality, and the next generation will be getting some disinformation instead of fact, and this is very, very dangerous. But also, if we have time, we really love to present the video.
Yes. Right. Maybe that's. Yes, do we have 2 more minutes for the? Is it 2 minutes? So we'll end with a video, and then we'll let you all go.
In one word about the video, here we launched it last year. We collaborate with the March of the Living, and we want to highlight the heroism that has been in the Holocaust, because most of the time the perception that the Jewish people went like a sheep to the slaughter, and but still there are so many heroism stories, so it was very important to highlight them. And I think also today, after October 7th, to see the Jewish resistance, it's very, very powerful.
In the summer of 1942, the mass deportation from Warsaw Ghetto began. 265,000 Jews were sent to the Treblinka death camp, to their extinction. Only 60,000 Jews remained. In the Warsaw Ghetto, two underground organizations were emerging at the same time. It was on the 19th of April, 1943, the first night of Passover, that marks the formal start of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Against thousands of marching Nazi German soldiers, 700 young Jewish men and women stood strong, without almost any weapons or experience in warfare. This heroic story will now be shared in their own words. The day before the outbreak of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the square and the streets of the ghetto were empty and abandoned. People preparing to go underground, fighters to their battle positions and outposts. We were to cause the enemy a heavy loss.
When the day dawned, I saw the thousands of Germans surrounding the ghetto with machine guns, with cannons, and there we stood opposite them, some 20 young men and women. Each one had a revolver. The entire unit had 2 rifles, homemade bombs.
Beginning from today, we shall shift over to partisan tactics. It is impossible to describe the conditions under which the Jews of the ghetto are now living. Only a few will be able to hold out.
I detonated the explosives. I was shocked into inaction after the massive explosion and German bodies flying in the air. This was the first time since the war had broken out that the Germans were running away.
The Germans fled twice.
This was 2 and 5 minutes.
It was 2 or 5 minutes,
Yeah.
and I just want to say, you know, the importance of what you just saw. For me to underscore, I said this at a hearing in the UN, and at the time I said, you know, 2023 is not 1943 because it was 2023. I say now, 2024 is not 1944. The understanding, and I quote Golda Meir, who said, you know, the world hates a Jew who hits back. Well, the state of Israel is the Jew that can hit back after thousands of years. And so we not only have the capacity, but I would say the responsibility in our time, and Avi quoted, you know, the understanding of Ima charish techarishi ba'et hazo. We are at what is, I feel it very much an existential moment, not just for the Jewish nation state and not just for Jews around the world, but actually for humanity, for democracies everywhere. And we have a role to play in this, and we have the capability and the responsibility to actually equip ourselves with the necessary information, and every single individual can make a difference, certainly in the online spaces. So thank you for being here, and thank you to the organizers for including this very important session in what is an entire sort of technology-oriented, interdisciplinary conversation. I very much appreciate being here and having the opportunity to engage. Thank you.
And thank you, Michal. It was a great privilege to be alongside you here in this fireside chat. And also, I want to say that we are like in the battle of David against Goliath here. We are like 50 million Jewish. They have to deal with almost 2 billion Muslims around the world. And after all, we're a startup nation, so we definitely should, and we have to, and not we should, we definitely need to do it, leverage the technology, leverage the Gen AI, leverage AI, and also do it in a cross-sector collaboration, and also do it cross-border collaboration. So thank you so much.